In exactly 2 hours, Maya would find a blood-stained ledger hidden beneath a billionaire's floorboards that only she could decode. In exactly 6 hours, 20 armored SUVs would paralyze the traffic of downtown Chicago to find the girl with the lemon-scented hands. And in exactly 24 hours, the man currently laughing at her would be forced to choose between his tongue and his life. But Maya didn't know any of that yet. Right now, the only thing she knew was the sharp, acidic sting of industrial bleach in the cracks of her knuckles and the weight of the $12,450 medical debt notice folded into her pocket. A number that felt like a tombstone. She was scrub-brushing the marble foyer of the Verago penthouse, her knees aching against the cold stone, when a pair of $2,000 Italian loafers stepped into her field of vision. "I still cleaning up other people's messes, Maya?" The voice was like a ghost she'd spent 3 years trying to exorcise. She didn't look up, her hands continuing their rhythmic, desperate scrubbing. She knew the owner of those shoes. Brandon, the man who had taken her inheritance, her dignity, and then left her for a woman who didn't have calluses on her palms. "I'm working, Brandon. Move your feet," she said, her voice like gravel. "Working?" He let out a sharp, jagged laugh that echoed through the vaulted ceiling. He leaned down, his expensive cologne clashing with the smell of her cleaning supplies. "You're a maid. You're just a maid in a cheap polyester uniform, scrubbing the dirt off the floors of men you aren't even allowed to look at." He reached out, his fingers catching her chin and forcing her head up. Maya's body stayed rigid, none her mind screaming to run, but her eyes remained icy. Deep in her satchel, tucked behind the rags, was a small silver signet ring she'd never been able to sell. A ring with a crest that would make the most dangerous men in the city stop breathing. Brandon smirked, oblivious to the fact that he was standing on the precipice of a war he couldn't survive. "Face it, you're invisible. Nobody in this city would even notice if you vanished into the fog tonight." He didn't see the shadow moving in the doorway behind him. He didn't see the heavy, scarred hand of the man who actually owned this penthouse, the man they called the Butcher of the North Side, resting on the doorframe, watching the girl on the floor with an expression that looked dangerously like recognition. "Brandon," Maya whispered, and her grip tightening on the scrub brush until her knuckles turned white. "You really should watch your step. The floor is still wet." Brandon's grip on Maya's chin tightened, his thumb pressing into the soft skin of her jaw with a bruising force. "Look at you," he sneered, his eyes scanning the faded fabric of her uniform. 3 years ago, you were draped in silk. Now, you smell like ammonia and failure. I wonder what your father would think if he saw his little princess cleaning the toilets of men like me." Maya didn't flinch. She leaned into the pressure, her voice a low, dangerous hum. "My father died with his honor intact, Brandon. Can you say the same about the money you stole from his estate?" The smirk vanished from Brandon's face. He raised his hand. In the heavy gold watch on his wrist, the one she'd bought him for their anniversary, glinting in the light. "You always had too much mouth for someone with nothing in her pockets." He swung. Maya closed her eyes, bracing for the impact of a palm against her cheek, but the blow never came. Instead, there was a sickening thud, the sound of bone hitting leather, and a sharp, strangled gasp from Brandon. Maya opened her eyes. A massive, scarred hand had caught Brandon's wrist mid-air. The grip was so effortless it looked casual, but Brandon's face was already turning a panicked shade of purple. Standing over them was Dante Verago. He was 6'4" of pure lethal muscle, dressed in a black shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the faint edge of a tattoo that looked like a jagged crown. Dante didn't look at Brandon. His dark, predatory gaze was fixed entirely on Maya, still kneeling on the floor. "In my house!" Dante's voice was a low, vibrating bass that seemed to rattle the floorboards. "We do not touch the help." "Dante, Mr. Verago," Brandon stammered, his legs shaking. I'm sorry. This girl, She was being disrespectful. She's just a maid I used to know. I was teaching her a lesson. Dante's eyes shifted to Brandon. It was like a wolf looking at a fly. A lesson? Yes, she's a nobody. A thief, actually. She probably has your silver in that bag right now. Brandon pointed a trembling finger at Maya's worn satchel. Dante let go of Brandon's wrist. Brandon stumbled back, massaging his arm, thinking he'd won. Dante stepped toward Maya. He didn't offer a hand. He simply looked down at her. "Stand up," Dante commanded. Maya's legs felt like lead, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She stood, wiping her damp hands on her apron, refusing to look him in the eye. "Open the bag," Dante said. "Mr. Verago, please," Maya whispered. "I haven't taken anything." "The bag, now!" With trembling fingers, Maya reached into the satchel. She moved the cleaning rags aside, hoping to find her phone, but her hand brushed against the cold, heavy metal of the silver signet ring. She tried to hide it in her palm, but as she pulled her hand out, the ring slipped. It hit the marble floor with a distinct melodic ping and rolled across the foyer, stopping exactly at Dante's feet. Brandon pounced. "There, I told you. She stole it. That looks like real silver." Dante didn't listen. He reached down and picked up the ring. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, his eyes narrowing as he studied the engraving, a phoenix rising from a bed of thorns. The crest of the Moretti family, the bloodline that was supposed to have been wiped out in the Great Purge 20 years ago. The silence in the room became absolute. Dante looked from the ring to Maya's face. He saw the high cheekbones, the defiant tilt of her chin, and the deep amber flecks in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before. "Where did you get this?" Dante asked. The edge was gone from his voice, replaced by something much more terrifying, curiosity. "It's mine," Maya said, her voice trembling but firm. "It's all I have left." Brandon laughed, a high, nervous sound. "She's lying. She probably found it in the trash. Maya, tell him the truth before he kills you." Dante ignored him. He took a step closer to Maya, invading her personal space until she could smell the tobacco and expensive bourbon on his breath. He held the ring up to her face. "There are only 3 people in the world who should own this ring," Dante whispered so low only she could hear. "2 are dead. The 3rd is the missing heir to the Moretti throne, the girl who owns this city by birthright." He leaned in closer, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "Who are you, Maid?" Dante didn't wait for her to answer. His hand, heavy and smelling of expensive sandalwood and something metallic, clamped around Maya's upper arm. It wasn't a violent grip, but it was absolute. "Wait!" Brandon shouted, his face twisting into a mask of ugly desperation. "Mr. Verago, you're making a mistake. That ring. She probably slept with some drunk in a bar to get it. Maya is a nobody. I lived with her for 2 years. She's just a girl who cries when the rent is due." Dante stopped. He didn't turn around. He simply tilted his head, his profile silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. "You lived with her for 2 years," Dante repeated. His voice was a low, terrifying purr. "And in 730 days, you never noticed the crest on her finger? You never noticed that her blood runs thicker than the swill you sell in your father's nightclubs? It's just a piece of jewelry," Brandon hissed. Dante finally turned. The look in his eyes made Brandon's knees hit the marble floor. "That piece of jewelry is the reason your family's business was allowed to exist in this city. We owed the Morettis a debt. A debt I thought was cancelled because I thought they were all in the ground." Dante looked back at Maya. His thumb brushed against the pulse point in her wrist. It was erratic, jumping like a trapped bird, but her gaze remained steady. "Marco!" Dante called out. From the shadows of the hallway, a man in a grey suit appeared. He was leaner than Dante, with eyes that looked like they had seen the end of the world and found it boring. Marco, Dante's right hand, bowed his head. "Sir?" "Take this. Trash, Dante gestured vaguely at Brandon, and ensure he understands the penalty for laying hands on a Moretti heir. Then freeze his father's accounts. By midnight, I want the name Brandon erased from the registry of this city. No, Dante, please! Brandon scrambled forward, reaching for the hem of Dante's trousers. Marco stepped in between them, his movement a blur. He grabbed Brandon by the collar of his designer shirt. You should have kept your hands in your pockets, boy. As Brandon was dragged screaming toward the private elevator, the silence that followed was suffocating. Maya stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the silver ring still held in Dante's palm. The debt notice in her pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. You're one of them, Dante said, stepping so close Maya had to tilt her head back. The daughter they hid away before the fire. I don't know what you're talking about, Maya lied, her voice cracking. I just need to finish the floors. I need the paycheck, Mr. Verago. Dante let out a dark, humorless chuckle. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a gold-plated phone. Paycheck? Maya, in 5 minutes. And the bank that holds your debt will be owned by a holding company you haven't heard of. In 10 minutes, that debt will be listed as paid in full by a dead man. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. You aren't a maid anymore. You never were. You were just a ghost waiting for a body. I can't be who you think I am, she whispered. I've spent 3 years learning how to be invisible. I like being invisible. Too late, Dante said. He took her hand, the one red and raw from the bleach, and slid the silver signet ring back onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for the heat of her skin. The city already knows you're here. My men saw the ring, Marco saw the ring, and the people who started that fire 20 years ago. They'll have heard the echo of that silver hitting the floor before the elevator hits the lobby. He gripped her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. Maya's body betrayed her. Despite the fear, a jolt of electricity sparked where they touched. Her heart wasn't just racing anymore, it was drumming a war march. You have 2 choices, Maya Moretti, Dante growled, his eyes locking onto hers. You can walk out that door and be hunted by the men who killed your father before you reach the subway. He paused, his hand moving to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her loose hair. Or you can stay here, in my house, under my protection. And tomorrow we start taking back everything they stole from you. Maya looked at the door, and then back at the man who held her like she was the most precious and most dangerous thing in the world. What's the price? She asked. Dante's smirk was slow and predatory. I don't want your money, Maya. I have enough of that. I want the one thing the Moretti family never gave anyone. What? Your loyalty. Maya didn't move as the elevator doors hissed shut, leaving her alone in the cavernous penthouse with a man who could end a bloodline with a phone call. The silver ring felt heavy on her finger, a physical anchor to a past she had buried under layers of soap scum and silence. You're shaking, Dante said. It wasn't a question. He didn't wait for her to deny it. He walked to a sleek obsidian kitchen island and poured a glass of water from a crystal carafe. He slid it across the counter. Drink before you faint on my marble. I've already paid for one cleaning today. I don't intend to pay for another. The dryness of the remark snapped Maya out of her trance. She reached for the glass, her fingers trembling so violently the water sloshed over the rim. Before she could pull away, Dante's hand covered hers. His skin was scorching against her cold, bleach-worn fingers. Sit, he commanded. Maya sat. Her body felt like it was operating on a 3-second delay. She watched as Dante, the man whispered about in the dark corners of the city as the King of Thorns, reached into a drawer and pulled out a small white tube. He took her hand again. This time he didn't let go. What are you doing? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. The Moretti heir doesn't have scarred knuckles, he muttered, his focus entirely on her hand. He squeezed a dollop of expensive, scentless cream onto her skin. His movements were clinical, almost detached, but the way he massaged the lotion into the cracks of her skin was agonizingly thorough. Maya's breath hitched. She should pull away. She should run. But her legs felt like lead, and the warmth of his palms was the first kindness her body had felt in years. Her logic told her he was a predator marking his territory. Her heart told her he was the first person to actually see her in 3 years. "Your father was a fool," Dante said quietly, his eyes still on her hand. "He tried to keep you clean of the mud. He didn't realize that in this city, if you aren't the one throwing the mud, you're the one being buried by it." "He wanted me to be happy," Maya countered, a spark of the old Moretti fire returning to her eyes. "He didn't want me to be like you." Dante finally looked up. His dark eyes were inches from hers. "And look where that got you, scrubbing floors for a man like Brandon. Is that happiness, Maya?" He didn't wait for her to answer. He stood up, towering over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. "Marco is bringing a tailor and a doctor. You will be examined, measured, and fitted. By tonight, you will look like a queen. And tomorrow, we go to the Moretti estate." "The estate is a ruin," Maya said, her voice trembling. "The bank seized it." "I bought the bank this morning," Dante said simply. He walked toward the massive glass window, looking out over the city he ruled. "The ruin is gone. I had the grounds cleared while you were scrubbing my floor. The thorns are being pulled, Maya. Oh, it's time for the phoenix to wake up." He turned back to her, his face a mask of cold, hard stone. "Go to the guest suite. There is a robe on the bed. Shower. Get the smell of bleach off your skin. I find it distracting." "Distracting?" Maya stood up, her pulse thrumming in her ears. "Or disgusting." Dante's gaze dropped to her mouth for a fraction of a second, a flicker of raw, unchecked hunger crossing his face before the mask snapped back into place. "Both," he lied. "Now go." Maya turned and walked toward the hallway, the silver ring glinting in the afternoon sun. She didn't see the way Dante's hand tightened into a fist until his own knuckles turned white, or the way he let out a long, shaky breath the moment she disappeared from view. Maya sat on the edge of the velvet-tufted guest bed, the silk of the robe feeling like water against her skin. The smell of bleach was finally gone, replaced by the scent of expensive white tea and jasmine. The door creaked open, and she tensed, her hand instinctively flying to cover the silver ring on her finger. It wasn't Dante. Marco, the man in the grey suit, entered holding 3 garment bags. He laid them across the bed with a precision that bordered on military. When he looked up, his expression was no longer bored. It was solemn. "The seamstress will be here in 10 minutes to take your measurements," Marco said. He paused, his gaze dropping to the ring on her hand. "I haven't seen that crest in 24 years. "You knew my father?" Maya asked, her voice small. "I was a scout for the Moretti family when the fires started," Marco replied. He took a step closer, then his voice dropping to a low, respectful rasp. "Dante has been looking for you since he took over this city. We all have. We thought the line had ended in the ashes of the Northside estate." "Why was he looking for me?" Marco let out a short, dry laugh. "Because Dante Verago doesn't believe in unfinished business. And because a man like him, he spent his whole life building a kingdom, only to realize he's the only one in it. He needs the Moretti name to legitimize his claim. But more than that," Marco looked toward the closed door, then back at Maya. "I've worked for that man for 15 years. I've seen him face down firing squads without blinking. But today, when he saw you on that floor, his hands were shaking for an hour after you left the room." Maya's heart skipped. He told me he just wanted my loyalty." "Dante doesn't know how to ask for what he actually wants," Marco said, turning to leave. "Just remember, Miss Moretti, the men who killed your family are still out there. They've grown fat and rich off your inheritance. Dante is the only wall between you and them. Don't let your pride knock that wall down." As Marco exited, Maya looked at the garment bags. She unzipped the first one. Inside was a gown of deep, midnight emerald silk, the exact color of the Moretti family banners. She wasn't just being protected, she was being weaponized. The transformation was more than just fabric and thread. As the emerald silk slid over Maya's skin, it felt like an armor she hadn't worn in a lifetime. She stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back. The hollows of her cheeks, once carved by hunger and stress, now looked like high aristocratic bone structure. A soft knock preceded Marco's re-entry. He held a leather-bound folder. "The paperwork is complete," Marco said, his voice dropping to that businesslike tone that brooked no argument. "The $12,450 medical debt for your father's final hospice care. It didn't just disappear. Dante bought the collection agency, then he burned the records. You are legally, financially, and socially clean." Maya felt a weight lift off her chest so suddenly it made her dizzy. For 3 years, that number had been a ghost following her down every hallway, a shadow in every room. "Why?" she asked, her voice stronger than before. "Why go that far for a stranger?" "Because to Dante, you aren't a stranger. You're an investment in the city's future." And Dante protects his investments." Marco gestured toward the door. "He's waiting for you in the study. We leave for the gala in 20 minutes. It's time the people who stole your life saw who's coming to take it back." Maya walked down the long, dimly lit hallway toward the double oak doors. Her heart was a steady drum now, not a panicked flutter. She pushed the doors open. Dante was standing by the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was dressed in a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, making him look less like a businessman and more like a king prepared for a massacre. When he turned and saw her, the glass stopped midway to his lips. The silence lasted for a full minute. "You look," Dante started, his voice rougher than usual. He set the glass down with a heavy thud. He walked toward her, his eyes scanning every inch of the emerald silk, the way it clung to her waist, the way the Moretti ring caught the firelight. "I look like a Moretti," Maya finished for him. "No," Dante whispered, stopping just inches away. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, no longer red from bleach but glowing. "You look like the reason men go to war." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. For a moment, the boss, the butcher, and the king vanished. There was only the heat of his breath and the terrifying magnetic pull of a man who had waited 20 years for this exact moment. "Tonight," Dante growled, "we don't just walk into that room, we set it on fire." The grand ballroom of the Blackstone Hotel was a sea of diamonds and lies. At the center of the room stood the men who had orchestrated the Moretti downfall, fat, complacent, and convinced that the past was buried. The music died a sudden, jarring death as the double doors swung open. Dante Verago entered first, his presence alone enough to chill the air. But it was the woman on his arm that caused the room to stop breathing. Maya walked with her head high, the emerald silk flowing behind her like a river of blood. She spotted him immediately, the man who had signed the final order to seize her home. Commissioner Vane. He was laughing with a group of investors when he saw the ring on her finger. His glass shattered on the floor. "Impossible," Vane gasped, his face draining of all color. She was a maid. We tracked her to a basement apartment in the slums." Dante stepped forward, his hand resting possessively on the small of Maya's back. The entire room bowed, not to him, but to the bloodline he was guarding. "The slums are closed for the season, Commissioner," Dante said, his voice echoing in the dead silence. "And the Moretti family is back to collect their interest, starting with your resignation and ending with your confession." Maya looked at the circle of powerful men who had once looked through her as if she were glass. She didn't feel pity. She felt the cold, hard weight of her birthright. I remember the smell of the smoke, Maya said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. And tonight you're going to remember the name Maya Moretti. Dante leaned in, a dark, satisfied smirk on his face as the police, Marco's men in disguise, began to move through the crowd. "Well done, my queen," he whispered. Maya stood by the window of the penthouse, watching the rain streak against the glass like tears on a cold face. The $12,450 debt notice was gone, but the ghost of it remained. She remembered the night her father died, the smell of antiseptic, the rhythmic hiss-thump of the ventilator, and the way Brandon had stood in the hospital hallway checking his watch. He hadn't been waiting for the doctor to give good news. He had been waiting for the heart monitor to flatline so he could move the Moretti funds into his shell accounts. For 3 years, Maya had lived in a 200-square-foot basement where the walls sweated and the radiator screamed through the night. She had learned to eat ramen dry to save on electricity. She had learned to tuck her hair under a grease-stained cap so no one would see the Moretti glow that her mother used to talk about. Her hands, now soft from Dante's expensive creams, still felt the ghost of the industrial bleach. It was a physical memory of her humiliation. "You're thinking about the fire again," a voice rumbled behind her. She didn't turn. She knew the vibration of Dante's footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, the steps of a man who owned the earth he walked on. "I'm thinking about how easy it was for them to erase me," Maya whispered. "One night of smoke, and I went from a princess to a ghost scrubbing the floors of the men who lit the match." Dante stepped beside her. He didn't touch her, but his heat radiated off his suit. "They didn't erase you, Maya. They just put you in a cage of poverty. And the thing about cages is that once the door is ripped off, the animal inside is much, much hungrier." He handed her a black leather folder. Inside were photographs, surveillance shots of Commissioner Vane, Brandon's father, and 3 other men she recognized from the night of the accident. "They think they're attending a gala tonight to celebrate a new merger," Dante said, his voice dropping to a predatory whisper. "They don't know they're attending their own funeral. I've spent $4 million in the last 6 hours, ensuring that every exit in that hotel is manned by someone who answers only to me." Maya looked at the photos. The men looked happy, they looked safe. They had no idea that a girl they once called just a maid was currently standing in a $30 million penthouse, deciding their fate. "I don't want them dead, Dante," Maya said, her grip tightening on the folder. "Death is too quick. I want them to feel the way I felt when I was scrubbing that floor. I want them to feel invisible." Dante's smirk was a jagged line of silver in the dim light. "Then we'll do it your way. We'll strip them of their names first, then their gold, then their breath." The Blackstone Hotel smelled of lilies and betrayal. As Maya stepped out of the armored SUV, the flashes of the paparazzi were like silent explosions. She didn't flinch. She had practiced her Moretti stare in the mirror of the guest suite for 3 hours. It was a look of cold, detached regalness that signaled she was untouchable. Dante offered his arm. "Ready?" "Ready." The moment they crossed the threshold of the ballroom, the air seemed to vanish. The viral hook of her appearance was working perfectly. People weren't just looking, they were recoiling. To the elite of Chicago, seeing a Moretti was like seeing a ghost walk through a wall. And they reached the center of the floor. Commissioner Vane was there, holding a glass of vintage champagne. When his eyes met Maya's, his hand began to shake so violently the liquid spilled onto his silk tie. "Mr. Verago," Vane stammered, his eyes darting to the silver ring on Maya's finger. I didn't know you were bringing a guest, especially one with such a familiar face." "Guest?" Dante asked, his voice booming across the silent room. "This isn't a guest, Vane. This is the owner of the ground you're standing on." Maya took a step forward. The emerald silk hissed against the floorboards. She looked Vane in the eye, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel the weight of the debt. She felt the weight of the crown. Commissioner, Maya said, her voice like a velvet blade, I believe you have something of mine in the Moretti ledger, the one you stole from my father's safe while his body was still warm. Vane opened his mouth to lie, but the words died in his throat as Marco stepped out of the shadows, holding a pair of silver handcuffs. The game is over, Vane, Dante growled. The maid is finished cleaning. Now she's taking out the trash. The room exploded into chaos as the guards moved in, but Maya didn't look back. She walked out of the ballroom, her hand firmly in Dante's, the silver ring shining like a beacon in the night. Thank you so much for watching the full journey of Maya Moretti. This was a story of revenge, bloodlines, and the man who refused to let a queen stay in the shadows. If you want to see part 2, where Maya finally confronts Brandon in his prison cell, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Also, I have a question for the real fans. Should Maya marry Dante to solidify her power, or should she rule Chicago alone? Comment, marry or solo below. I'll be hearting the best responses.